Do you have any idea what these cost?
I'm so sorry, ma'am. I didn't.
Don't touch things, don't touch anything. Just stand there and let someone competent handle this.
If you have ever been overlooked, talked down to, or made to feel like you don't belong in the room, do not touch that screen. Do not scroll. Do not skip ahead. Because what you are about to witness is the story they never wanted told. It will break your heart in the first 10 minutes. And then it will put it back together in a way you didn't expect. Stay until the end. Because the ending will stay with you for the rest of your life. The mop bucket hit the marble floor of the Whitmore Grand Hotel lobby at 6:47 in the morning, and the sound rang out through the entire atrium like a bell. Maya didn't flinch. She had stopped flinching at things like that a long time ago. She bent down, steadied the bucket, wrung the mop head against the side, and kept moving, slow, deliberate circles across the floor of what the travel magazines reliably described as one of the 10 most luxurious hotels in Manhattan. The chandeliers above her head had been imported from Vienna. The floor beneath her feet was Calicut marble, veined in gold and gray. The flower arrangements in the lobby were replaced every 48 hours at a cost that, if Maya let herself think about it, could have covered 2 months of her rent. She did not let herself think about it. She had been doing this for 3 years. 3 years of arriving before the sun came up, before the guests came down, before the city outside the tall glass windows had fully committed to being awake. 3 years of polishing surfaces that would be walked across and never noticed. 3 years of being the reason everything looked effortless for everyone else. 3 years of being invisible. Not invisible the way a painting on a wall is invisible, where at least the painting has a frame, a title, a place. Invisible the way a chair is invisible, the way a light switch is invisible. Something so expected, so necessary, and so unremarkable that no one ever pauses to think about it at all. The guests walked past her every morning and did not see her. The executives in their tailored suits spoke on their phones without lowering their voices because she did not register as an audience. The women in their designer coats and their school drop-off energy and their to-go coffee cups clicked past on heels and did not make eye contact because making eye contact would require acknowledging that she was there. She had one name in this building, Housekeeping, not Maya, not Miss Carter. Not even an approximation of her actual identity, just Housekeeping. As in, Housekeeping, can you get that spill in the East Corridor? As in, Housekeeping, someone left towels on the floor of Suite 12. As in, Housekeeping, we need you on the 4th floor. There's been a situation. She was 27 years old and she had a degree from the University of Maryland that she kept in a folder under her bed in her studio apartment in the Bronx. She was 27 years old and she was already tired in the way that has nothing to do with sleep. But she showed up. Every single morning she showed up. Because her mother in Baltimore had a hospital bill that kept growing. Because her younger sister was in her junior year at Howard and needed books, tuition, the particular small costs that pile up quietly and become crushing. Because the landlord had sent a text last month that ended with the phrase, "by the end of the week," in a way that left no room for interpretation. So Maya showed up, she wrung the mop, she kept her eyes down. She moved in circles across floors that cost more per square foot than she made in a month. She endured and she waited. For what, she couldn't have said precisely. She just knew, with the deep, stubborn certainty of someone whose dignity has been compressed but not destroyed, that this was not the end of her story. She just didn't know yet how violently the next chapter was about to announce itself. Her name was Vivienne Calloway Rhodes. She was the kind of woman who had been beautiful so long and wealthy so long that she had confused both conditions with virtue. She wore confidence the way a weapon is worn, not as a defense but as a warning. She entered rooms as though they had been prepared for her specifically, and she left them slightly diminished, as though she had taken some essential quality of the air. She was 44 years old, the daughter of a real estate dynasty, the second wife of a hedge fund billionaire named Harrison Rhodes, and the most photographed woman in the New York social circuit for the past 6 consecutive years. Her charity galas raised money for causes she selected with the careful eye of a woman who understands that philanthropy is also branding. Her apartment on the Upper East Side had been featured in Architectural Digest. Her Instagram had 3.1 million followers. She stayed at the Whitmore Grand for 2 weeks every January because she claimed her apartment underwent its annual deep cleaning during that period, though people who knew her well suspected the real reason was that she simply enjoyed being in a hotel where 40 people were paid to attend to her comfort. She had been a guest at the Whitmore Grand for 6 consecutive Januaries. She had never once learned the name of the woman who cleaned her suite. She had, however, noticed Maya exactly once. It was 7 months ago. Vivienne had been on a call, a long, sharp call with her publicist about a profile piece in a magazine that had used an unflattering photograph, and she had turned the corner near the elevator banks without looking, her tote bag swinging, and walked directly into Maya's cleaning cart. The cart's upper shelf had pitched forward. A bottle of glass cleaner had toppled off and hit the marble with a crack, the cap breaking and a thin stream of blue liquid spreading across the floor. A stack of folded towels had slid off the edge and landed at Vivienne's feet. Vivienne had stopped mid-sentence. She had looked down at the towels. She had looked at Maya. She had looked at the blue liquid edging toward her Bottega Veneta heels. "Are you serious right now?" she had said, not to her publicist, to Maya. And then into the phone, "I'll call you back." And then to Maya again, with the particular patience of a person who is not patient at all. "Do you have any idea what these cost?" Maya had immediately crouched down and began collecting the towels. "I'm so sorry, ma'am, I didn't. Don't touch my things," Vivienne said. The same way one might say, "Don't touch a wound reflexive and total. Don't touch anything. Just stand there and let someone competent handle this." She had called the front desk from her cell phone, standing in the corridor, watching Maya with an expression of mild clinical distaste, the way one might regard a minor infrastructure failure, a blown fuse, a slow elevator. Inconvenient, impersonal, not worth anger, just disappointment in the general state of things. The front desk manager had arrived in under 2 minutes. Maya had received a formal written warning that afternoon. The warning letter was still in her locker. But here was what Vivienne did not know. In the chaotic 30 seconds of the collision, when the cart tipped and the towels scattered, and Vivienne's tote swung wide and its contents shifted, Maya's eyes had caught something. A document sliding partially out of a folder, a photograph paperclipped to the top, a name printed in bold letters at the header that Maya recognized because she had, before all of this, before the mop and the marble and the invisible mornings, spent 2 years working in a law firm in Midtown Manhattan, and that name had been relevant to a case she had researched, and she had never forgotten it. She had said nothing. She had replaced everything carefully in Vivienne's bag. She had handed it back with both hands and her eyes down, but she had seen. And the thing about Maya Carter was that she had a mind like a locked room. Things went in, they did not come out, and they did not become less significant with time. She had seen, she had remembered, and she had waited. The invitation arrived on a Thursday morning. It came in a thick cream envelope, the kind of stationery that announces itself through texture alone, the kind where the paper has weight and the printing is engraved rather than printed, the kind that cost $40 a single sheet. It was placed in Maya's employee mailbox with her full name written across the front in navy ink. She stood at the row of mailboxes in the basement staff area and stared at it for a moment before opening it. "You are cordially invited to the annual Whitmore Charity Winter Gala, hosted by Mrs. Vivienne Calloway Rhodes, to be held in the Grand Ballroom of the Whitmore Grand Hotel, New York City, on the evening of Friday, the 9th of December. Dress code black tie, formal attire required. Kindly RISP by the 25th of November." Maya read it twice. She turned it over, nothing on the back. She sat down on the wooden bench against the wall, the same bench where she sat every morning to change into her uniform, and she held the envelope in both hands and thought very carefully. Her first thought was that it was a mistake, someone's name confused with hers, an administrative error in the front office. Her second thought, quieter, colder, and considerably more accurate, was that it was not a mistake at all. She had worked here for 3 years. She knew Vivienne Calloway Rhodes had organized this gala for the past 4 years running. She knew the guest list ran to 350 names: senators, executives, socialites, celebrities, philanthropists, people whose faces appeared in newspapers. She knew the ticket price for a table was $40,000. She was a housekeeper. There was no universe in which her name ended up in that envelope by accident, which meant it had been placed there deliberately. And she could think of only one reason why a woman like Vivienne Calloway Rhodes would deliberately invite a woman like Maya Carter to an event like this one. She folded the envelope, placed it in her bag under her water bottle and the worn paperback she carried everywhere, and said nothing to anyone. That evening, in her studio apartment in the Bronx, the one with the good light in the afternoon and the radiator that hissed through October and the fold-out table she used for eating and reading and the occasional act of planning, she sat with the invitation in front of her and thought about the document she had seen in Vivienne's bag 7 months ago. She thought about the photograph. She thought about the name. And slowly, with the careful precision of a woman who knows that patience is not passive, that patience, done right, is preparation, she began to plan. There was a woman named Ruth Alderman who lived on the second floor of Maya's building. She was 67 years old, a retired costume designer who had spent 35 years working in theater, Broadway, off-Broadway, regional, and for a period in the 90s film. She had dressed leading ladies and chorus performers and understudies, and once memorably, an entire cast of 42 for a production of Les Miserables that ran for 2 years and won 3 Tony Awards. She had a storage unit in Queens full of fabric samples, dress forms, and the organized chaos of a long creative life. And she had an apartment full of plants and framed playbills and a sewing machine by the window that she still used regularly. She had watched Maya move in 3 years ago with a single duffel bag and a box of books, and had brought down a plate of cookies the following morning, and they had been having coffee together on Sunday afternoons ever since. Ruth was the only person in Maya's life who knew about the degree under the bed, about the law firm, about what had happened at the law firm, about the chain of events that had left Maya, at 24, unemployable in her field and applying for a housekeeping position at the Whitmore Grand because it was the only job she could get that paid enough to cover the hospital bills. She had never once told Maya to move on. She had simply said, one afternoon over coffee, "The people who wronged you are still out there, and they still think you don't know what you know. That is a very significant advantage. Don't waste it." Now, on a Friday evening in mid-November, Maya went upstairs and knocked. Ruth opened the door, looked at her face, just her face, nothing else, and stepped back without a word. They sat at the kitchen table. Maya placed the invitation between them. Ruth picked it up, read it, turned it over, set it down, and looked across the table at Maya with the expression of a woman who has spent a lifetime making people into something they didn't know they could be. "Tell me what you're thinking," Ruth said. "I want to walk into that ballroom," Maya said, "and I want every single person in it to understand exactly who they've been ignoring." Ruth was quiet for a moment. She picked the invitation back up and looked at it again, the engraved lettering, the thick paper, the navy ink of Maya's name. Then she said, "What's your neck like in a deep V?" What followed were 3 weeks that Maya would remember for the rest of her life. Every evening after her shift, still in the quiet hours of late afternoon, the hotel settling into its dinner service rhythm, the lobby beginning its evening transformation, Maya changed out of her uniform, took the uptown train, and went home to spend 2 hours standing on a footstool in Ruth's living room, while the older woman moved around her with pins and chalk and fabric and the focused silence of a person doing the thing they were made to do. The fabric had been Ruth's choice entirely. Maya had said something dark. T and Ruth had gone to her storage unit in Queens and come back with 3 yards of a deep forest green silk that fell differently from every angle, almost black in shadow, vivid as a forest floor in direct light. She had also brought 2 yards of a matching structured underlayer and a length of hand-beaded trim that she had bought in Paris in 1997 and never found the right project for. "This has been waiting 26 years for the right person," Ruth said, holding the trim up against Maya's shoulder. "I'd say it found her. She worked with the intensity of someone settling an old score. She worked in silence for long stretches, and in those silences Maya stood still and thought about the plan she was building, the calls she needed to make, the document she needed to locate, the person she needed to find." One evening, during a fitting, Ruth told Maya about a production she had worked on in 1988, a show that a producer had tried to close on opening night because he had decided, at the last minute, that the lead actress wasn't the right fit. How the cast had refused to leave the stage, how the actress had gone on anyway, how the reviews the next morning had been the best reviews any of them had ever received. "The producer never worked on Broadway again," Ruth said, adjusting a seam at Maya's waist. "Not because we destroyed him, because he destroyed himself, and we simply refused to be part of the destruction." She stepped back and looked at Maya in the mirror. Something in her face shifted, something that was very close to satisfaction. "A woman who knows what she's walking into," Ruth said, "is the most dangerous thing in any room." Maya looked at herself. She had stood in front of mirrors in this building before, in this apartment, trying on Ruth's theatrical finds on slow Sunday afternoons. She had never looked like this. The gown fell from her shoulders and gathered at her feet in a way that managed to be both formal and completely natural, like water finding its level. Her posture had changed without her trying. Her chin had lifted. She looked like a woman with a plan. "Yes," Maya said softly. "I understand." She made the phone call on a Tuesday. She had spent 2 weeks finding the number. It had required careful research, the kind she had been good at once in a different life, working backward through public records, through professional networks, through the institutional memory of a legal world she had been expelled from without her consent. The man she called was named Daniel Graves. He was a senior partner at a firm in Washington, D.C., a real estate litigation firm with a client roster that included several of the largest property development groups on the East Coast. He was 51 years old, known in legal circles as meticulous and unforgiving. He had been involved 3 years ago in a case that had required a particular document to be, not destroyed, exactly. simply absent, simply unavailable when it should have been available. Vivienne Calloway Rhodes had known about the document, had known it should be absent, had known, in fact, exactly where it was and what it said and what would happen to her husband's portfolio if it surfaced at the wrong moment. Maya knew this because she had read it. In the 2 hours after the collision in the corridor, before she handed the bag back, she had not just seen the document. She had read it, because the part of her that had once been a paralegal never fully switched off, and when her eyes caught a legal heading she recognized, her brain engaged before her caution did. She had read it, and she had remembered it, and she had spent 7 months quietly verifying what it meant. Now she had verified enough. The phone rang 4 times. "Daniel Graves," the man said. "Mr. Graves," Maya said. "My name isn't important yet. What's important is that I know about the Whitmore property documentation from 3 years ago. The documentation that was supposed to be produced in discovery and wasn't. I know who had it. I know where it went. And I know that in 3 weeks, the woman who made it disappear is hosting a gala at the Whitmore Grand Hotel in New York. If you want the truth, not what you've been told, but the actual truth, I'd suggest you find a way to be in that building on the evening of December 9th. A very long silence. Then, who are you? Someone who cleaned up a mess, Maya said. That wasn't hers to clean. Someone who's done cleaning up other people's messes. She hung up. She pressed her hands flat on the table until they stopped trembling. Then she sat very still in her apartment and listened to the city outside the window, the sirens, the horns, the low constant thrum of 10 million people living their lives. And she thought about her mother's hospital bills and her sister's tuition and the degree under the bed. She thought about Vivienne's face in the corridor. Don't touch anything. Just stand there. She thought about the document. She was not afraid. She made one more call that week. This one was shorter and harder, and she almost didn't make it. She called a woman named Patricia Wells, a former colleague from the law firm, one of the associates who had been in the room the day Maya was called into the managing partner's office and told that her employment was terminated effective immediately, pending investigation of a theft allegation. There had been no theft. Maya had not taken anything. The allegation had come from a client, from Vivienne Calloway Rhodes, and it had been specific and credible sounding and delivered with the authority of a woman whose family had been clients of the firm for 2 decades, and the firm had not waited for an investigation to conclude before terminating Maya's employment. By the time the investigation concluded 6 weeks later, finding no evidence of theft, Maya had already been let go. The finding had been shared with her in a letter. The letter did not include an apology. It did not include an offer of reinstatement. It included a final paycheck and the phrase, "We wish you well in your future endeavors." Patricia Wells had been one of the only people at the firm who had believed Maya. She had said so privately at the time. She had said she was sorry. She had not done anything else because she had been 29 and frightened and practical, and Maya had understood that even then, even while being destroyed by it. They had not spoken since. The phone rang 3 times. "Maya," Patricia's voice, careful and surprised. "I need something from you," Maya said. "Not for me, for the record, for what actually happened." A pause. "I think you know what I'm going to ask." A long silence. Then Patricia said, "I've been waiting for this call for 3 years. The evening of December 9th arrived clear and brutally cold. New York in December at night has a particular quality. The cold is sharp enough to feel architectural. The lights of the city fracture in the dry air, and everything has the glittering, slightly unreal quality of a stage set. The Whitmore Grand's entrance was dressed for the occasion, the awning strung with white lights, valets in black coats, a procession of town cars and taxis delivering guests in silk and cashmere, and the particular effortful elegance of people who have been dressing for galas their entire adult lives. Maya had requested the evening off 3 weeks in advance. Her supervisor, a practical man named George who had worked at the Whitmore for 18 years, had looked at her with something adjacent to confusion, because in 3 years she had never requested an evening off on a weekend, and had approved it with a nod and a sure, no problem. She dressed in Ruth's apartment. Ruth did her hair herself, pulling it into a low, sculptural chignon that left her neck completely clear and made the lines of her face red like architecture. The makeup was precise, a sharp wing at the eye, a deep burgundy at the lip, no statement jewelry. The gown was the statement. When she was ready, Ruth stood back. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Ruth had been doing this for 35 years, making people into the versions of themselves that an audience needed to see. She had dressed leading ladies on opening nights. She had dressed women before auditions that changed their lives. She had seen over decades what it looked like when a garment and a person found each other correctly. She had never seen it look quite like this. "Listen to me," Ruth said. "Whatever happens in that room tonight, you were always this person. That building took 3 years of your life. It did not take you. You understand the difference? Maya picked up the invitation and the small sealed envelope she had prepared 4 days ago and tucked into her bag. Yes, she said. She hugged Ruth, the kind of hug that has years in it, and went down the stairs into the cold December night. The grand ballroom of the Whitmore Grand Hotel had been transformed. The ceiling was hung with thousands of tiny white lights that made the room look like the inside of a winter sky. The tables were dressed in ivory and champagne gold. Centerpieces of white orchids and silver-dusted branches rose 3 feet from the tabletops. The stage at the far end was framed in a cascade of white roses. Somewhere a jazz quartet played something cool and intricate and expensive. 347 guests had been admitted by 9 o'clock, senators and their spouses, tech founders and their partners, the heads of 3 New York cultural institutions, a former Secretary of State, 2 fashion designers, the kind of assembled wealth and influence that generates its own gravitational field and bends the behavior of everyone inside it. At the center of it all, near the entrance to the ballroom floor, working the room with the trained ease of a woman who has done this her entire life, was Vivian Calloway Rhodes. She wore ivory. Not white, ivory, the precise warm shade that sits just this side of the color, the shade that requires a perfect complexion to carry and carries it like armor. Her jewelry was diamonds and nothing else. Her hair was up. She was objectively extraordinary looking, the kind of beauty that doesn't diminish with age but transforms, and at 44 had become something more formidable than it had been at 25. She moved through her guests like a current, touching arms, remembering names, laughing at precisely the right moments, leaning in for precisely the right confidences. Her husband Harrison stood nearby, a large, quiet man with the slightly bewildered air of a person who has been attending events like this for 20 years and has never entirely figured out why, drinking scotch and speaking in low tones with other men his age about things that required low tones. Vivian had extended the invitation to the hotel cleaner as an impulse, a private game. She had done similar things before, not often, not with cruelty she would have named as such, but with the particular amusement of a woman who found class theater entertaining, who liked to watch the collision of worlds. She had expected, if she had thought about it at all, that the woman wouldn't come, or that if she came she would stand near the wall, overwhelmed and out of place, and it would be a small story Vivienne could tell later. She had not considered any other possibility. At 9:08, the ballroom doors opened. She came alone. This was the first thing the room absorbed, not the gown, not the face, not the way she moved, but the fact of the alone. A woman arriving at an event of this magnitude without an escort or a companion registered in the social calculus of the room as either a statement or a mistake, and within the first 5 seconds, most of the room had unconsciously filed it as the former. Then the gown registered. The deep forest green moved with her in a way that was different from the movement of the other gowns in the room. Not more elaborate, not more expensive, but more alive, somehow. More present, like a color that exists in nature in a room full of colors that exist in star stores. Then her face. Maya Carter walked into the grand ballroom of the Whitmore Grand Hotel with the pace of a woman who has been planning this moment for 7 months and has decided to arrive exactly as herself, not as a performance of herself, not as an elevated version or a costumed version, but as the actual, complete, unhurried person she had always been and had been prevented from being. She did not look around with wonder. She did not pause at the threshold in the way of someone adjusting to an unfamiliar world. She simply walked in, accepted a glass of sparkling water from the nearest server, and began moving through the room with the calm deliberateness of someone who knows exactly where she's going. The crowd parted slightly, not in deference, but in the instinctive way crowds part for people who project certainty. A woman near the entrance said quietly to her companion, "I don't know who that is." Her companion, a man who had been in New York society for 30 years, said, "Neither do I, but we should." Near the jazz quartet, a photographer for a society magazine, a woman who had covered 300 events like this one, and had an animal instinct for the one real moment in a room full of performed moments, raised her camera almost before she had consciously decided to. Near the ballroom entrance, Vivian Calloway Rhodes stopped mid-sentence. Her eyes found Maya across the room. Her face did something she could not prevent. It was not contempt. It was not the amusement she had anticipated. It was something she had not prepared for, something that moved behind her eyes and tightened briefly at the corners of her mouth before her extraordinary social control reasserted itself. It was recognition, not of Maya as the housekeeper. Recognition of Maya as something she had perhaps always been and that Vivian had simply chosen not to see. Maya's first stop was deliberate. She had done her research. She knew who would be in this room. She knew who mattered and in what way she found Dr. Caroline Huang at a table near the east wall. A woman she had identified as the chairwoman of the hotel's philanthropic foundation, the actual recipient of tonight's charitable proceeds. A woman with a reputation in New York's nonprofit world for being impossible to manipulate. She had short silver hair and reading glasses pushed up on her head, and the direct attention of someone who has been busy her entire life and has therefore learned to be efficient with it. Maya introduced herself simply, her name, the firm she had worked for before, the position she had held. Dr. Huang looked at her steadily. "You're not a guest of the foundation." "No," Maya said. "I was invited by the host." "I believe as a private entertainment." A pause. "Tell me more," Dr. Huang said. Vivienne, meanwhile, had recovered herself completely. She had recovered herself with the speed and total competence of a woman who has been navigating public social situations since childhood, and has developed an almost physiological capacity to suppress what she actually feels and produce what the moment requires. She laughed. She touched an arm. She redirected a conversation. She smiled for a photograph. But her eyes kept returning to Maya. She watched Maya speak to Dr. Huang. The conversation lasted 7 minutes. She tracked it covertly while continuing to work the room, and at the end of 7 minutes, Dr. Huang's expression was the expression of a woman who has received information she intended to act on. Vivienne felt the first cold thread of something she had not felt in a very long time. She turned to find her husband. Harrison was not beside her. She scanned the room methodically, as she had been trained to do from childhood, a quick quadrant sweep, face by face. She found him near the bar. He was speaking with a man she did not immediately recognize, a man who had arrived late and alone and who had not been on her guest list. She was certain of this. She had reviewed the guest list 3 times in the 48 hours before the event. A man who stood with the coiled stillness of a person who has received a significant piece of information recently and has not yet decided what to do with it. She stared. She recognized him. She had not seen him in 3 years. He was grayer. He had the look of a man who had been carrying something heavy and was close to setting it down. The cold thread became something broader. Daniel Graves was not supposed to be here, and he was standing at her bar, and he was talking to her husband. The conversation Harrison Rhodes was having at the bar with Daniel Graves lasted 11 minutes. Vivienne knew this because she stood 16 feet away and tracked every second of it, continuing to speak, continuing to smile, continuing to be present in 4 different conversations simultaneously, while the part of her mind that was always and permanently operational ran through every possible version of what was being said and found none of the versions acceptable. Harrison's face across the room was the face of a man being disassembled. She knew his face. She had been married to him for 9 years. She had seen him in board meetings and courtrooms and hospital waiting rooms and at his father's funeral. She had seen him furious and grieving and exhausted and triumphant. She had never seen this. This was the face of a man whose understanding of his own life was being revised in real time. A man who was listening to something that required him to put down, piece by piece, a version of his marriage and his past 3 years that he had believed was true, and replace it with another version that he could feel, even now, even from 16 feet away, that he did not want. At the end of 11 minutes, Daniel Graves said something quiet and final to Harrison, set his glass on the bar, looked briefly across the room. He found Vivienne's eyes for exactly 1 second, and the look contained no accusation, only a weariness that had nothing left in it, and walked away through the crowd and did not look back. Harrison did not move. Vivienne crossed the room. "Not here," she said very quietly. Her smile was still in place for the people around them, a remarkable feat of will. Harrison looked at her. "Not here," she said again. "Where then?" He was not shouting. He was almost completely still. This was, she knew, his most dangerous register. "Where exactly would you prefer? Where would you like to have the conversation about what you did to that woman? The woman who cleaned our suite? You want to pick the venue for that?" Vivienne's smile thinned further. "I need you to lower your voice." "I know you do," Harrison said. And he did lower it, not for her, but because he was Harrison and he had spent 40 years not making scenes in public. "I know you need that. I'll keep that in mind." He picked up his glass and walked away from her and did not touch her arm as he went. Maya found Vivienne. Or rather, and this was the detail that would be repeated later, in various versions by various people who had been present, Vivienne found Maya. Vivienne crossed the room and stopped in front of her, and the gathering attention of the room followed like a tide. Maya had expected this. She was ready. She was standing near the floor-to-ceiling windows at the far end of the ballroom, the city lights of Manhattan, arranged behind her like a backdrop that someone had designed. The winter sky above the skyline, a deep saturated blue that matched the color of the first version of the gown Ruth had almost made before deciding on the green. Vivian stopped in front of her. They were the same height, which surprised Vivian slightly. She was used to being the tallest woman in these conversations. She looked at Maya, looked at her in a way that she had not done in 7 months in the corridor, had not done in 3 years of walking past her in the halls of this building. She looked at her like a person. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The jazz quartet played something low and unobtrusive. The crowd maintained its conversational hum. "I know why you're here," Vivian said. Her voice was level. She was extraordinary. Even now, the composure was not performed. It was structural. It was load-bearing. Maya said nothing. "And I know what you know," Vivian continued. "Still nothing." "What do you want?" Vivian said. The question was genuine. She was genuinely asking, and both of them knew it. And both of them understood that the genuineness of the question represented more of a concession than anything else Vivian had said or done in the past hour. Maya reached into her bag and withdrew the sealed envelope. "Not money," she said. "Not a scene." She held out the envelope. "Open it." Vivian looked at it. She took it. Inside was a cover letter, 1 page, precise, addressed to the managing partners of Kellner, Wynn & Associates, the firm that had terminated Maya's employment 3 years ago. It was signed by Patricia Wells, currently a senior associate at the firm, stating clearly and specifically that the theft allegation made by client Vivian Calloway Rhodes against Maya Carter had been false, that the allegation had been made in connection with the concealment of a legal document relevant to the Whitmore property matter, and that Patricia Wells could and would testify to this effect. Below the cover letter was a second document, a formal request for a written retraction from the firm, a restoration of Maya's professional record, and a letter of reference adequate for re-entry into legal work. There was a highlighted line at the bottom. It required 1 signature. The room had been watching for some time. Not overtly. This was not a crowd that rubbernecked. These were people trained from birth to be discreet. But the configuration was too stark to ignore. 2 women standing very close, very still, while the party continued around them. The stillness at the center, Doctor. Caroline Huang had positioned herself near the edge of the natural gathering distance, close enough to observe, far enough to be deniable. Her face gave nothing away. Harrison Rhodes had not left the room. He stood near the bar with his back to the wall and watched. Vivian read the documents. She read them thoroughly. She was a thorough reader. This had always been one of her qualities. She did not skim. When she finished, she held them and was still. Maya waited. "If I sign this," Vivian said very quietly, "it goes away. If you sign this," Maya said equally quietly, "we both walk away from it." A pause. "And if I don't?" Maya held her eyes. "Then I hand these to Dr. Huang," Maya said. "Who has been briefed. Who chairs the foundation this evening is benefiting. Who I think will know exactly what to do with them. And the evening will continue however it continues." Vivian did not look toward Dr. Huang. She didn't need to. Something moved through her face. Not fear. She had not been afraid of much in her life. Not anger. Anger would have been easier. It was something older than either of those things. The feeling of standing at the bottom of a consequence you built yourself, looking up, understanding finally the full height of it. She looked at Maya for a long moment. "Is there a pen?" she said. It was not to anyone in particular. It was Harrison who stepped forward. He had crossed the room in silence. None of them had heard him come. He reached into his breast pocket, removed a pen, and held it out to his wife without making eye contact with her. The gesture was not cruel. It was simply clear. Vivian took the pen. She signed the cover letter. She signed the formal request with the slow, deliberate strokes of a woman who has been writing her name on important documents for 20 years and understands that some signatures are simply more significant than others. She held the documents back out to Maya. Maya took them. "Thank you," she said simply. No performance in it, no triumph. Just thank you. Vivian was quiet for a moment. She looked at Maya, at the forest green gown, at the low chignon, at the face of the woman who had been cleaning her suite for 3 years without a name, and something in her expression changed in a way that was too small and too real to be anything but involuntary. "I'm sorry," she said very quietly, almost without sound, like something that had been waiting a long time in mind for a way out and had found one finally. Maya looked at her. She thought about the morning the letter had arrived. The managing partner's office, the escorted walk to her desk, the box of her belongings, the subway home. She thought about the first morning at the Whitmore Grand, standing in the staff changing room in a uniform that didn't fit yet, looking at herself in the scratched mirror and thinking, "This is temporary," telling herself that with enough conviction that it almost became true. She thought about the degree under the bed, about Ruth at the sewing machine, about her mother and her sister and everything that had required her to keep showing up. She thought about what it had taken for this woman to say those 2 words. "I know," Maya said. And she walked away. She paused near the door to say goodbye to Doctor. Huang, who held Maya's hand in both of hers for a moment and said quietly but with considerable directness, "Call my office on Monday. Don't wait. I have a friend at Sullivan and Cromwell who has been looking for someone like you for 2 years." Maya thanked her. She paused at the grand entrance of the ballroom and turned around one final time. She looked at the room, the white lights threaded through the air, the orchids, the people in their silk and cashmere, the bar where Harrison Rhodes still stood, alone now, looking at nothing. She had cleaned this room on her hands and knees. The chandeliers she had polished with a step stool and a microfiber cloth. The floor she had buffed at 6 in the morning while the city slept. The windows she had squeegeed clean so that the guests could look out at Central Park without a streak. She had made this room beautiful for 3 years. She did not need to stay in it. She pushed through the door and stepped out into the cold December air. The city was enormous and bright and completely indifferent, the way cities are, and she stood on the sidewalk outside the Whitmore Grand Hotel for exactly 30 seconds, breathing. Then she hailed a cab and went home. The photograph ran in a society magazine 11 days later. The photographer had submitted several images from the evening, but this was the one the editor had selected. The one taken at the moment of Maya's entrance, capturing her in motion, the forest green gown caught mid-step, her face in three-quarter profile, her expression neither smiling nor performing, but simply present in a way that very few people managed to be photographed. The editor was a woman named Dana Park, who had been in magazines for 20 years, and who had a policy of never running photographs that looked like the subject knew they were being photographed. She had found in 30 years of being in rooms like this one that the photographs that lasted were always of people doing something real. This was of a person doing something real. The caption was hers. She showed up. She stood her ground. She walked away on her own terms. Patricia Wells's letter was received by the managing partners of Kellner, Wynn and Associates on a Monday morning in December. The response took 11 days and 3 phone calls and 1 meeting that Maya did not have to attend. The retraction came by certified mail. The letter of reference came by email the same afternoon. Fulsome, specific, and written, Maya noted, in the careful language of people managing liability, but containing, despite itself, an honest account of what she had been and what she had done there. The blacklisting, informally maintained through 3 years of industry whispers, did not survive contact with Patricia's documentation. These things never do, in the end. They require ongoing maintenance, and the person doing the maintaining had other problems now. She received 4 professional inquiries in the first 2 weeks. She took the call from Sullivan and Cromwell on the advice of Dr. Caroline Huang, and she liked the woman who ran the practice group, and she accepted the position, not because it was the most prestigious of the 4 offers, but because the woman who ran it had built that group from 2 people to 20 over 15 years, and had the quiet, grounded manner of someone who has learned the difference between power and authority. She called her mother the day the contract was signed. Her mother cried, which she never did, and then apologized for crying, which she always did, and then said, "I always knew, Maya. I always knew this was not the end." Her sister sent a voice note at midnight that was mostly incoherent with happiness. She did not move out of the Bronx immediately. She thought about it. She went to look at apartments in other neighborhoods. She stood in several bright, expensive rooms and thought about them, and then went back home. She liked her building. She liked her Sunday afternoons with Ruth. She liked the radiator that hissed through October and the good afternoon light and the fold-out table. She would move eventually, but not yet. Not while there was still coffee to drink on Sunday and a story to finish telling. Ruth wanted every detail. She got them over several Sundays. The entrance, the green of the gown and the ballroom light, Vivian's face, the pen, the 2 words. She listened with her chin in her hand and her coffee going cold, and the particular quality of attention she brought to everything, which was total. Did she actually look sorry? Ruth asked. Or did she look like someone who got caught? Maya thought about it. Both, she said. I think they can be the same thing at first. I think real sorry has to start somewhere. Ruth considered this. Generous, she said finally. Not critically, observationally. I didn't do it for her, Maya said. I did it for me. There's a difference. Ruth looked at her across the table. Yes, she said. There is. Vivian and Harrison Rhodes separated 6 weeks after the gala. It was not a public separation. There was no announcement, no statement, no carefully managed press narrative. There was only the quiet, grinding reality of a man who had been given a piece of information that restructured his understanding of 9 years, and who had sat with that restructured understanding long enough to know he could not live inside it. Vivian did not fight this. She had, in the weeks since the gala, been doing something she had not done in a long time. She had been sitting with things, the document, the letter she had written 3 years ago. the reason she had written it, the chain of small, self-serving decisions that it seems at the time like simple pragmatism, and which had accumulated over 3 years into something she could not look at cleanly. She did not speak publicly about Maya Carter. She did not attempt to reframe or revise or manage. She sat with it. Whether this was the beginning of something or simply the end of something else, no one but her could say. On a Monday morning in February, Maya Carter arrived at the offices of Sullivan and Cromwell in Midtown Manhattan at 8:30, set her bag beside her desk, accepted the coffee that the assistant always brought first thing, and opened her laptop. There was a research brief waiting, a wrongful termination case, a client who had been pushed out under circumstances that didn't add up, a paper trail that had been obscured, but not by someone who knew how to look, obliterated. Maya opened the file. She read the first page. She thought, I know exactly how to do this. She was 27 years old. She had a degree from the University of Maryland that she had moved from under her bed to the shelf above her desk, in a frame Ruth had given her for Christmas that said nothing on it except her name, her degree, and the year. She had a plan, she had a pen, she got to work. If this story reached something in you, if you saw yourself in Maya, in any version of Maya, at any point in that story, do not leave without doing something. Share this right now. Text it to someone who feels invisible today. Post it for the person in your life who has been told, directly or indirectly, that they don't belong in certain rooms. Tell them the room doesn't decide who you are, you do. Like this video if you believe that what was taken from you unjustly does not define you, that the only thing that defines you is what you do next. Subscribe because this channel exists for the people who show up before sunrise, the people who endure without being seen, the people who are building something in the quiet that the world hasn't caught up with yet. They said she was just the help. She walked into their room in a gown that cost nothing and was worth everything. And not one person in that room forgot her face. That is not a fairy tale. That is what happens when someone refuses, absolutely, completely, at the very bottom of their exhaustion, to become the small thing other people needed them to be. Don't let them make you small. Not today, not ever.